Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for sticking around. We had to iron out some slight technical issues there, but everything is back on track. So, hello and welcome to UX Insiders. This is a live event hosted by the UX Design Institute, and it features contributions from the most interesting and creative people in the UX field. So, in the UX Design Institute, we aim to deliver world class education to the next generation of UX professionals. With our live events, we aim to bridge the gap between education and industry for budding designers by talking to some of the best people working in UX. And today's guest is no exception. Judging by the response to this event so far, it feels like we have a design celebrity among us. So Louis Ouriach is a design advocate at Figma. In his role, he collaborates with product, design, and engineering teams to help improve and enable design at scale. He also creates best practice guides and content across written, audio, and visual media. You can find his newsletter, Milk No Sugar. You can also listen to his podcast, 8 Pixels Radio, and he's also a full-time professional Twitter memer at Disco Lou, which hopefully we will hear more about later on. So, Louis, we are so excited to have you here today, and the response to this event has been so positive. There will be time for Q&A throughout the event, so anybody tuning in, please make sure to type your questions throughout the event, and we can kind of run them through to the relevant sections, or you can also upvote them in terms of priority if you've one that seems like a real hot ticket to ask. So, Louis, welcome. How are you?
Thank you so much. That was the best introduction I've ever received in my entire life, and now I feel like a little bit of pressure to deliver on the goods. I can see in the chat already that there's people from every single country in the world here. Just seen Philippines, we've got Montana in the US. So it's morning, evening, afternoon. Hello, everybody. It's good to kind of meet you all. And I can't wait to see what questions are going to come up. Apparently, we've got some hot takes, so I will do my best to put those fires out. But I do enjoy memery on Twitter. I also like to kind of test the industry a little bit. I have what's been apparently a weekly trend where I'm trying to get people to test components. So what are they called? How would you structure them? All that sort of stuff, just because I think that the industry is in a really weird position where there's a lot of gatekeeping, but also a lot of mystery around design systems and components. And I would love to be able to help people get better at that kind of stuff. So questions outside of this are always welcome. You know where to find me. But if you have questions immediately, let's deal with it. Otherwise, let's get on with it.
Yeah, let's ease gently, I think, into this, and then we'll build ourselves up to the controversy because, as we were saying before we logged on, we love a bit of controversy on a Wednesday. So, Louis, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into design initially?
Yeah, I'll try and keep this as brief as possible. I've been a designer professionally since 2011, and I almost kind of accidentally slipped into the industry by choosing a degree that had some kind of creative element inside of it. And as part of that, I did a module which introduced me to web design. And having been given the opportunity to see it, I really liked it. Liked web design, I liked front end development, and I sort of grabbed it. And then I've sort of not let go. I really enjoy solutions. I'm quite a solution oriented person, and that has allowed me to do that throughout this career. I've mostly worked as a solo designer in design companies from e-commerce to charity to news to hospitality to startup. And so I've sort of sampled lots of different areas of the industry. But I personally, right now, I really enjoy thinking about systems and structure and process and that sort of stuff. So that's typically what I get to do on a daily basis.
So I think a lot of people will kind of flag the title, your job title at the moment, and be like, what exactly is that? So could you expand a little bit on the role of a designer advocate and like how exactly you actually moved into an area like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So designer advocate effectively sits in the middle of marketing, sales, community, product, at basically every department. We're the people who are publicly facing, so doing things like this. We're also the people who typically have had experience as a designer and have either gone through a process of migration to Figma or generally just love the product and really like to evangelize for it. So we are, in air quotes, experts in the product. We know it, we use it quite a lot. And we want to make sure that everybody else can understand it at scale and as fast as possible. So that leads into things like creating resources, doing webinars, talks, events, customer sessions. We do have customers that we need to satisfy, so we do quite a lot of those. And then generally trying to get everything that's in our brain out to everybody else. So that comes through, for me personally, in community resources, videos, tips, Loom videos, those kind of things. But there's tons of other opportunities for us to do that. So if anybody has any ideas about how or other methods you'd love to see us producing, let me know, and we can start thinking about those as well.
And when you are kind of in the role of kind of promoting best design practices, are there particular areas that you find yourself kind of returning to time and time again, or like certain difficulties that just keep popping up?
Yeah, so a designer advocate typically works with larger teams. So we mainly start with 50 designers plus in an organization, and we go in and advise mostly on things like architecture of your Figma workspace. So your team structure, your project structure, your file structure, component naming conventions and structure, and auto layout and naming of layers and that sort of stuff. We get really deep into all those real process heavy elements. At the same time, there's 10 or 11 of us now, so we all have individual specialisms in that field. One of us is really interested in sort of illustrations and vector work. So they spend a lot of time with customers trying to debug and make better illustrations, icons, that kind of thing in Figma. As I said before, I'm really into components, so I really love nerding out about that. Other people are really interested in things like organization structure, so hiring, growing your design team, making that as effective as possible. So in the star diagram, I guess, of what a designer is, we all align with something on that star or that circle, and we try to align our advice with whatever we find most interesting and sort of that process.
And as kind of like your career progresses and maybe people are becoming a bit more open to the idea of what a designer advocate kind of is and how they can actually come and improve a working environment, are there particular areas that you've really seen improve since you've kind of started this phase of your career?
Yeah, just the interest in systems. And when I say systems, I mean basically inside of Figma, a UI kit, outside of Figma, a design system. People are really, really engaged in building UI kits and building design systems. So that sort of trajectory over the past 2 years at least has been amazing. And it does mean that it's forcing the industry into what is it? What is a system? What is a UI kit? What is its purpose and who should be involved? So they're the questions that we need to really answer from our perspective, but also as an industry. And I really wanted to help to do that. So the exercise that I was mentioning earlier on Twitter that I try and run is at least trying to nudge that down the road a little bit to say, nobody really knows what we're doing. And as people with experience and who have access to speak to hundreds of people every day, we want to make it easier for you. So if you're interested in UI kits and design systems, now is an amazing opportunity to start learning about it.
And because we have such a wide range of people with so many different levels of experience who are tuning in today, in terms of making sure that you are maintaining the best practices, is there a huge turnover in kind of new tools or any kind of new softwares? Are there certain ones that have a definite longevity that all designers should really kind of get to grips with?
Yeah, I think ultimately you need to get your idea out of your head and into a developer's hands. And that the way that you do that, I don't really mind, as long as it happens fast, efficiently, and at scale. So that could be using Figma as canvas. It could be using a whiteboarding tool. It could be using pen and paper. So whatever you need to get this into the hands of other people to build a product in an efficient and financially responsible way, I'd back 100%. The tools from a more practical perspective, nobody's quite cracked how to manage copywriting and design, how they cross over. There's a ton of different tools that allow you to do that, from something as simple as a spreadsheet to something as sophisticated as a SaaS monthly subscription tool. They can plug in as much as you need into your design tool, but there's still no perfect way to do it. Additionally, getting the designs from a canvas or from an image into front-end architecture is still really hard. So plugging the gap between design and code is also something that, firstly, that Figma are thinking about, but secondly, that, again, nobody's really cracked how to do it at scale, mostly because every engineering team is different and they have different coding practices, naming conventions, ways of working, that it makes one blanket suggestion or tool for every designer nigh on impossible.
Now, this question will be where a little bit of the tea begins to get poured. So would you believe that kind of a lot of universities manage to keep up with the changing pace of the design world? Because a lot of people do come from kind of an independent kind of way of learning or teaching.
Yeah.
Can universities actually match the pace of how kind of fast it moves in the real life practices?
I think from a bureaucracy point of view, it's quite hard. There's definitely courses that enable you to get up to speed quickly. But I went to university and my degree was teaching me things that were 5 years behind. So that meant I needed to do a lot of work in my side spare time to get up to speed. But there are definitely courses that get you there. The question really isn't to me about whether you are keeping up the pace on the industry. It's whether you're getting taught skills that you need to be a good employee. And that is basically being curious, being interested, and having the sort of do it attitude that would enable you to firstly get a job, but also to excel in a career. There's been an incredible amount of people in the past few years who have transitioned to something like software engineering by taking a boot camp. And that's somebody who hasn't traditionally been engineering focused. My brother has done it. He started in marketing. He's got a literature degree, but he transitioned to become a software engineer because he had the right mentality and the right skill set to apply it. So I think that as long as you can teach people to apply yourselves and be interested, curious, and know how to go and get answers to questions, it should be fine. The tooling can always be taught. So whenever I speak to design teams who are hiring designers who maybe don't know Figma yet, I say, I don't really mind, because you can teach somebody Figma in an afternoon. You can't teach them how to be a great thinker and how to come up with solutions to problems.
Yes, I suppose maybe the attitude is like, once you kind of graduate, like the book isn't closed, like you have to keep going.
Exactly. And don't assume that you're going to get taught everything at university. You still have to put the work in. Yeah,
the real life practices are the things that really challenge you. So I think that this might be a nice segue into what we have scheduled here as prototype time.
Cool. All right, so I'm going to share my screen and hopefully this works. And also feel free to fire questions away whilst I'm doing this, folks. Okay, can you see?
Looking good.
Perfect. All right, so I've just done an introduction. I'm happy to share this file after. Today, I'm going to run you through a series of prototyping exercises in Figma. They might be quite fast, so if they are, I apologize. I'm happy to go over things again. As you mentioned, I hang out on Twitter quite a lot. I have a newsletter and I have a podcast, which I'm very lazy with, but I do have one. And I'm also going to be weaving in some keyboard shortcuts whilst I do this, just to make it easier for you to get to that speed and that efficiency that I think is really important to be the best designer you possibly can. So the first one, Command or Control period or full stop on your keyboard hides the side panels inside of Figma. I use it all the time when I want to present individual things. So hide, zoom in and out, show your screen, bring them back, Command and period. First thing I'm going to do is show you a looping animation. So to bring a frame on the canvas, if you've not used Figma that much, a frame is like an artboard. I press F on my keyboard or drop that down and get that from the top menu here. Then select this iPhone frame. So we have a frame on the canvas. I'm now going to press R for rectangle and select this and add it to the canvas. I'm now going to select my top level frame here and press Command and D or Control and D if you're on a Windows to duplicate that. And I can drag this to make it in a different position if I want, or I can select both of these and use this pink handle in the middle to space these out if I wanted to. Additionally, I can use the panel on the right-hand side to set that as a fixed value if I wanted to. So now what I have is two frames with two rectangles. These are actually identical. So if you look in the layers, we've got rectangle 1 and rectangle 1. I'm going to Command and click in here and press Command and R to rename. So Command or Control and R is a batch renaming. So I'm going to call these just shape here. Really key keyboard shortcut that I use all the time is Shift and Enter and Enter. So Shift and Enter now will take me back to the parent layers. Enter takes me inside. So Shift, Enter, Enter. It's a really quick method to get into layers if you really need to drill down into your frames. Okay, I'll select the second one. I'll zoom in a little bit by holding Command or Control, and then pull this radius in from the top right, or I can manage it from this properties panel on the right-hand side. I'm then going to drag this down. I'm going to make it a different color. So let's set up a simple click prototype here. Select my rectangle, Shift and E to go to prototype mode. So I don't have to use my mouse to travel top right. I can use Shift and E to go between design and prototype mode. Then I'm going to drag this handle over. I'm going to do the same with this one. You'll notice we now get this flow one that appears here, and I can double click into here to rename it. So I'm going to rename this to be looping animation. Then I can press the play icon to open this prototype up and then see our very simple click prototype that's been managed in here. Not very interesting. So what I'm going to do is actually make this loop back and forth without me having to do any clicks. So I'll select my noodles. We call these noodles and delete them. Select my top level frame and drag the handle over to this top level frame here as well. Then set the interaction to be after delay. So this basically says after 800 milliseconds, navigate to this frame. I'm going to keep this as an instant for now, and I'll show you why in a second. Select the second one and drag this back. I'm just going to move this down so you can see those noodles between each other. After delay, 800 milliseconds, navigate here. Now when I go back, you can see that I'm not doing anything, not clicking anything. It's just kind of looping itself around on the canvas. And if I select both of the top level frames, I can then set the interactions from one place. So I've got after delay 800 milliseconds, switch this to smart animate. And what that will basically do is look at those shape layer names and say, right, they have the same name. Let's select and look up the position, the color, and the size of these and blend them together. So now you can see that this is now looping back and forth between those two different colors, the size, the position, and the shape. So as you can imagine, what you could do with this is create something like a looping animation for your app, your product, something like that. And you could even use that as a component. So then you're not relying on something like a loading GIF. You're actually using Figma's frames and shapes to make that happen. All right, next one is a scrolling container. So as you'll see here, I've got a few components. I have this content card at the top. I have a scrolling container which contains those components inside, underneath that. And then I have my prototype frame underneath there. So what I'm going to do first is hold Option or Alt if you're on Windows and drag that into my frame. You'll notice that there's a blue outline here as I'm dragging it. And if there's not, I can hold Command on my keyboard to pull up that blue line. That now nests it inside my frame, even though it's like kind of falling outside. And the way to manage that is if I toggle back to the Design tab with Shift E, there's this Clip Content option on the right-hand side. So if I check this, you'll see that now hides the content. If I uncheck it, it pulls it back up. If I enter this into prototype mode, let me just close the previous one here. You'll see I've got my frame, I've got my designs in there, and this is now cut off the screen. To make this scrollable, there's a few things that I can do here. So if I select my top level frame first, go to prototype, you'll see on the overflow scrolling settings, we have this horizontal scrolling. Now, if I go back to my prototype, I can scroll horizontally in here, but that's not really great because we want this top section to be fixed. So I'm going to head back and reset that to no scrolling, select my scrolling container, and then wrap this inside a frame. So I can do that in a couple of ways. Either I can press F on my keyboard and draw a frame and then move that on inside using the layers panel. Or if I undo this, I can select my scrolling container here and press Command Option G, and you see it now wraps it inside this frame. So I'm now going to name this as underscore clip. This is a useful technique that I use to tell people that if there's an underscore in the name, we should ignore it. It's not part of the main layout. I'm probably using it for forcing something like this, or generally it should just be ignored. Now I have that frame, I can drag it to be the size I need. As I drag it here, you'll see it snapping to the top section with those little red lines. If I need to check the spacing, I can hold Option on my keyboard and see that that's now 24 from both sides. Now what we do is clip this content like so, head back to prototype and go to horizontal scrolling here. And now I can scroll within this section without having to disrupt the top section itself. So only that area is now going to scroll. Okay, next one is data. So I have a similar idea here, but I've already set this one up. You see, I've got my clip here and I've got my scrolling container inside, and I'm actually going to run a plugin to fill this with data. So right click, plugins, and I have a plugin here called Content Reel. This was actually built by Microsoft. So if you head to figma.com/community, you can search for Content Reel and that will pop up for you. What I'm then going to do is hold Command on my keyboard and drag a box over all of these dates here. Then I can select the date field from here, just click it, and it now fills all of them with a date. So I've already got that data now in from my date. And now what I'm going to do is Command and select all the names here and do full name. That's now filled that with all those names. And it's going to propagate down to my list when I pull that in. I think I've got the wrong one here. Let me just check. Go to my Design tab. And I'm actually using the wrong page here. So I'm going to head back, go to local components, and in my data one, I'm just going to detach this component and turn it back into a new component. Double click in.
Do you mind if we just slow things down a little bit so people can kind of try and match your pace? Everybody's
Are people building this live?
People are trying to, but just so that they can kind of kind of set their eyes on the page a little bit easier.
Sure.
Yeah,
we might not be able to get through everything, but I'll give it a go.
Yeah, we've a mix of beginners and we've a mix of advanced people as well. But yeah, and a lot of people, as a reminder, everybody will be able to rewatch this back. Playback will begin instantly, and you will always have access to this recording. So if you want to kind of run along and do the practices along with Louis, it is possible to do it with playback and kind of pause and stop and rewind where you need to. So that's me interjecting. That's me.
No problem. No problem. So I'm going to drop this menu down here on the right hand side. This is basically selecting which component I'd like to use inside that frame. As I know, I'm now using a component from this scrolling container page, which is the wrong one. I'm going to head back and now open the data page, which is this little folder here, and select my scrolling container from there. And you now see the data is correctly popping up inside of here. The last thing I'm going to do is command and select my images here. So command, shift, click in here, all of those images, and then run a different plugin. So I'm going to right click, plugins, and Unsplash. And then this is going to allow me to pull in any images from the website unsplash.com. So let's go to the technology one here. Just click this. That will now load up and fill all of my images with technology images. So now if I select any of those, you'll see in the fill settings on the right-hand side, I've got that image fill from Unsplash. So now if I head to my frame down here, select that clip option, go to prototype, make sure we've got horizontal scrolling here, and then click my prototype frame, go to play. What this will allow me to do is preview my, my prototype with the data. So now I can scroll through here and see all that data populating in here. So two really useful plugins that I'd recommend you check out is the Unsplash one and then the Content Reel one from Microsoft as well. Okay, this one's more of a demo rather than me building, but I'm going to show you it anyway. So there's another plugin that I'd recommend you check out if you ever need to work with anything like a map. So if you end up designing an Airbnb or like Google or something like that, you might end up designing maps. And this plugin is called Mapsicle. So I'm going to go to install plugins here, and I actually don't have it installed. So I'm going to go and find a plugin, which pops open this little window here. And I'm going to search for Mapsicle. I'm going to run this. It's going to open up Mapsicle for me as a little window. And I can select my rectangle shape, create map. Oh, it's set me a different one. So I've now got this rectangle, this map here. I'm going to make this a bit larger. What I'm then going to do is inside my prototype screen, you'll see I still have that clip option here. I'm going to select my map and drag it, holding Command or Control, inside that clip frame. So you now see it's hidden inside. I can go back to my Design tab and then use the alignment controls here to align that into the center. Selecting my clip frame again, going to prototype mode. I've now got horizontal and vertical scrolling here, which will allow me to pan inside of here. So I'm going to select this, play. Now when this loads up, I can use my mouse scroller to zoom in and around this frame here. This is really useful if you end up needing to have larger panable areas inside of your prototypes. You can do that using the horizontal and vertical scrolling and making sure that the contents of this frame are actually much larger than its parent here. Okay, next one is navigation. So you can see I've got 3 frames here. And what I'm going to do is actually add a navigation bar between all 3 of them. So you see at the top here, I've got a home with a red emoji, about with a green emoji, and contact with a blue emoji. And they've just been emojis that I've added to names. So if you're on a Mac, a really nice keyboard shortcut is Control, Command, and Spacebar. That then pops up your emoji bar. And you can see my most used emoji is these ones. So I've added just an emoji circle to these frames. And now I'm going to add basically a simple circle. So press O on your keyboard, draw a frame, and then copy this a few times holding Option and Shift. Select my first one, pressing I on my keyboard to sample the red, I on my keyboard to sample the green, and I on my keyboard to sample the blue. Then I'm going to press F again and wrap these in a frame. Go to my Design tab, and you'll notice that the iPhone frames are typically 375 in width. So I'm going to select my frame 1 and make this 375. I'm then going to give it a nice rounded height. So I'm just going to actually say 96. And then you'll notice that we're now actually losing where those are. So again, that keyboard shortcut from before, press enter, and then I can drag these in the center here. And if I want to tighten up the layers, tighten up the spacing here, you'll see in the top right-hand side, it says 81. I'm going to put 40 in here. And then make sure these are centered just by holding shift and dragging those into the center. Lastly, I'm going to select my menu, just move it into the center here, and give it a different background color. So we've got this nice dark gray. Double click to rename it as menu. And then what we traditionally do is we have a menu. Let's make this a component. So I can make this component in one of 3 ways. At the top here, the create component option, or I can right click, create component, or use the keyboard shortcut, which I typically do to turn that into a component here. So let's do that. Now I've got my component. You'll see it's slightly different. It's got a purple outline. There's also 4 diamonds in the layers here. So I'm going to select this and press Command and C to copy, or Control and C, and paste it into my frame. You'll see it now goes into the center. So I can use the alignment panels in the top right to push that to the bottom. Copy, select both of the other frames and paste, and it will place it into the same position. What we typically then do is select an example. So let's select this green circle here, oval, go to prototype, and we then drag that to the next frame, select the blue one, drag that to the next frame, and do that for all of these. This isn't the most efficient way to do that though, because we currently only have 3 frames, but in a definite real world scenario, you might end up having hundreds of frames where you need to manually connect all these screens up. And the way to do that at speed, let me just delete these ones from the inside, is to use this component as a jumping off point. So if I select the red oval here and drag this out, select the green one, drag it up, and select the blue one, you now see we've got those 3 connections that have been added to this component. Now if I Command and C for click and paste it into my screen, align it, and then copy again, select both frames and paste. If I select any of these components now and go to the prototype tab, you'll see all those connections have already been set up for me. So this is the beauty of using a component to drive our connections, is that we can now inherit all of those connections in all of our designs. So this should save you a ton of time when you need to go and build those connections up. The next one is similar to this, but with a more real-world example, where you may be designing something like a cocktail app, and you need a menu to go across all of those. So as before, what we could do is select the menu and select our tabs and then drag these handles out to create those connections. But as I said before, this isn't the most efficient way to do that. So I'm going to remove this. You'll see I've got 3 states of this menu. I've got a recipes, explore, and account, and they're all styled slightly different. You'll notice that also the naming convention here. So I've got navbar/recipes, navbar/explore, and navbar/account. And what I'm going to do is drag a box over all of these. And in the design tab, I'm going to combine these as a variant. So notice what happens to the layers panel when I do this. Combine those variants. You've now just got a single navbar. So when I drop this open, you can see account, explore, and recipes are all nested inside that navbar component. On the right-hand side, you'll see it says property 1, account, explore, and recipes. If I double click into property 1, I can rename this. So let's just say active tab. Now when I select my component and create an instance of this by holding Option or Alt on a Windows to drag it out, you'll see on the right-hand side, I've got active tab, recipes, account, and explore. And that now toggles between all of those. When we think back to prototyping, we can also be pretty smart with this as well. So if I select or double click into this menu onto the recipes tab, you'll see what appears at the bottom of this is a little indicator, and it says select all 3 matching layers. So I'll zoom out and do that. And now I've got all 3 of those selected inside my variant, and go to prototype tab, and I can actually add an interaction for all 3 in one time. So if I click the plus icon here, click action, on click, navigate to my drinks 1. You now see all of those get set up automatically for me. And now I can do the same for explore. Select that, or I can just do command and click in here as well if I want to. I could do this manually like so. And we just move out of here, go back to the design tab and move that up. Same for this one. Or I could use that shortcut that I showed you before. So there's a few different ways you can do that. And I'll do this one manually as well, just to show you how that works. As long as the layer names are the same, you should get that interaction. So now I've got all these connections set up across all those different menus. And I can do the same thing as before. So select, Optional, Alt and drag into my design, align it, then copy and drop that into the other screens. And then we just need to select those components and make the active tab the correct one. So we've got the explore here, and we've got the account one, the last there. Now, if I select any of those, go to prototype, you can see all those connections have now been set up for us. Clicking the play on the flow one here will now take me into that prototype to view. And as I move through that, you'll see it navigates me through all those different screens. So using components can really, really make your prototyping a lot faster. And if you want to go to the next level, you could use variants on these components like so. Okay, the next one is Smart Animate. So I showed you Smart Animate before with that looping animation where it sort of blends things together. And here's another example of where we can be a bit funkier with that Smart Animate. So you'll see here I've got this leaf on the right-hand side, and it's actually the same across here. So as I hover on that, you'll notice that Figma is telling me they're the same thing with that blue outline. And if I want to see this in a bit more detail, I can press Command and Y. So what this now does is opens up what we call outline mode or skeleton mode, if you'd like. And it shows me everything that we have on the canvas. And I can see we've got both of those ovals, and the green tells me they're the matching layers. So back to the normal canvas with Command and Y again, or Control and Y. I can now start to think about my prototype. So I select the first one and just drag this over to the frame, or I can do it from the properties panel on the right-hand side. So I'll just undo this, click plus on the interaction. On click, I want to navigate to the second screen. So that now creates my noodle. I'll select the second oval, do the same thing as before, plus, click, navigate to iPhone 1 here. Open this up. And then when I click them, they transition instantly. So it's not that satisfying because it's just kind of jumping between them. If I head back, do the same thing as before, select those shapes, both of them, manage the properties from down here, go to Smart Animate. Now click them. You can see we're now blending those plants together. And it gets really nice, smooth animation. If I want to take this to another level, I could use what we call spring animations. So on the right-hand side, you'll see it says on click, navigate to here, using Smart Animate, using the ease out function. Or I can use a custom spring. So down here, you'll see I've got these spring options here, and I can make this larger and smaller if I want to, maybe do something like this. Let's see what happens. So I'm going to close this down and go to my prototype and click it. And you can now see that is having quite an interesting jump as I prototype that backward. Or I can make it a little bit softer by using a preset interaction. So let's go down to custom and just say bouncy. So that's now being bouncy over 800 milliseconds. And that now bounces really smoothly. So these are preset. You don't have to go and customize those. But using a combination of Smart Animate, sizing, clipping, you can make these nice animations here. Okay, this one has already been built for me, so I won't be doing this one live. But it's better for me to show you it first, and then we can talk through how it's been built. So I'm going to open this up by pressing the play icon here. This is effectively simulating something like a mini map. So if you've ever been to a shopping mall or a shopping center, you need to find yourself around the area, you may have interacted with something like this. And what we can do here is actually click these areas, and it will navigate us through all of these different areas around this map. So this may look pretty complex, but it's actually quite simple to build. And it's only using these elements. So we have this map component here, and that's basically the entire surface that we have that we want to navigate throughout. And then in our mini map, the separate frame, you can see we've got some interactions set on the map itself. So if I select the map, go to unclip the content, you can now see it shows all of those connections that we had before. If I clip it again, it's now hiding those. So these interactions themselves are actually pointing to individual elements of that design. So this is actually using a scroll to animation. So it's navigating within itself effectively to jump us around that canvas. And it's using that animate property. Same with this one. You see the noodle changes. It's navigating us around individual map areas inside of here. The reason we're using a component here is because if we wanted to change something, we can do it from one place and that goes to all of them. For example, if I want this to not be this fill anymore, but maybe want it to be this light pink, I could do that and it would propagate down to my instance on the right-hand side, or this darker one, for example. So it's a really quick way to manage properties if you're using a component that is nested inside something else. Next one is another scroll to example, but maybe a more real world example of when you're building something like a landing page. So if I go to prototype here, you can see these connections have already been set up. And again, it might be quicker for me to just show you what it happens. So I click the frame and go to play and close the other ones here. And once I'm inside here, you'll see that I've got the menu at the top, home, about, and photos. And if I click them, it zooms me down to that section of that website or that landing page. Once we're inside here, we can also use that technique from the map to navigate within itself the photo section. So if I click water, it jumps me to the water, desert. I can jump between these different sections and jump up and down within here as well. So how has this been structured? You'll see that the home link here is actually just referring to itself. So if I remove this, delete, and just drag the handle over to this element here, it automatically knows that we want to use this scroll to animation. Same with the photos one. If I select this and delete it, and then just drag the handle down to the bottom, it's saying on click, scroll to frame 4. And that's just the name of this frame. So if I rename this to be photos and click my handle again, it says scroll to photos. So it's best practice to name your layers, although I haven't done that here, just so it's easier to know what you're navigating between. And the same things we've been doing before, this frame is actually clipping content so you can see those photos that are hiding on the outside. And those connections are actually jumping between those different sections of that map there. So it's, again, pretty simple stuff, but it gives you a really nice effect to simulate a real world example. I might actually jump through the next one and jump over to this drag here, just to show you something a little bit more interesting, a little bit more fun, and not necessarily product design based. We've got all these Game Boys here. And this is something that my colleague Roger actually built for us. If I toggle on the prototype, you can see there's loads of connections here using this on drag feature. And drag basically means if you select something and move it, I want to transition to something else. So if I show you what that looks like, you'll see these actually loop around. So these ones go to here, these ones go to here and back, and it sort of connects everything up in a nice circle. If I play this one and start dragging these handles, you can see that's actually transitioning between that and the next shadow. So it's moving those really nicely using that drag animation. Same with the vertical one. You can see the little character on the inside is moving. And again, that's just using a simple drag. So because these elements are named the same, you can see we're using poor layer names here again. We've got group 2, but you'll see that the other ones are actually highlighted as well. We've got the blue outlines and everything. Same with this one. We've got the blue outlines here because they're exactly the same element. They're just differently positioned. So if you want to build anything funky like this, just make sure you're using a couple of different screens and the same element across them. So I'll give you a very quick example about how to build that live. I drag a frame here. Let's just have a simple oval here and then a frame with a background color and then another frame for the bar, which I'm going to drag across. Let's make this one red. So I'm going to move this above the layer here and just make sure it's nicely centered by snapping that into place. I'll duplicate this. And now you'll notice that as I enter into both of these, we've got the same layer names appeared here. I'll select this one and move this over here to the end, holding shift, and this one too. So I'll move this to the end. Now I'll select one bar, put shift and E into prototype mode and move this over here. And instead of on click, I'm going to select on drag. And then this one too, on drag. Now, if I go and play this, I might make these a bit darker so you can see the contrast a bit better. There we go. Go and play this. and hopefully it works. So as I drag this, you can see that's now moving my ball at the top as well. And if I make that a little bit slightly different, so let's make it bigger and different color, like so. As I drag this up and down, you can see that's transitioning now to be something like a planet, a planet moving. So as you can see, it's pretty simple to pull these things together. It gives you a really nice effect as you're starting to create some more sophisticated designs. The next one is also related to this, but it's using a more real world example where if you've ever done any front end development, you may have come across a term called Z-index. And Z-index basically means like the layer stacking. So what is on top of another thing? What is below another thing? And I came up with this idea here to introduce effectively a layer stacking idea, but using prototyping. So I'll show you it first, and then I'll show you how I built it. I'll go to play here. Yes, and if you want to manipulate the size of what a prototype appears like, you can press Z or Z on your keyboard, and that'll change the zoom level. That's also available at the top section in the options panel. You can choose a zoom level here. You can also hide the Figma UI if you want, and you can disable keyboard navigation and show or hide the hotspots as well. So this one here, I've got a skew like angled design here. And as I drag this, you can see the layers are actually popping up and down on the canvas. And as I move it to the end, it then has a little transition at the end to show me the last state of this. So as I go back and forth, you can see those layers are popping up and down using that same drag interaction that I showed you before. So how has that been built? It's actually pretty simple. So that variant component that I showed you before, where you have one component, but lots of different states on the inside, I effectively have, let me hide those panels, 3 of the same thing here, but they're using different heights. So within here, I've got the same elements as this one, but I just nudged them up manually using my keyboard, like shift up to move those up and down in there. Same with this one, same elements in there, but I just used the Z-index simulation to make those happen. If you want to build something like this yourself, let's just take this screen out here. And I'm going to pull my panels back in with Command and P. I'm actually going to detach this component. So I right click, detach instance, and then turn it into a component itself again, just so I've got a new main component, like so, and then create an instance of this, option and drag. If I right click, go to plugins, and find a plugin called Skew Dat, it's quite a funny name. This allows me to add that perspective to my design. So if I pull this up like so and pull it back, you can now see that I'm manipulating that transition to be a little bit more of an interesting skew. So now I've got this here. I've got my main component. So if I change anything in here, let's just select this and select those two. I've now got 2 cards selected, and you notice I get these little pink handles that appear in the middle. I can drag and reorder those, and you can see that's happening live also in my instance. So this is another beauty of using components, is that you can manage those things at scale. Again, if I wanted to change the color of this, let's just change this brand primary. I'm going to detach this and change that to become that pink from before. You can now see the pricing has changed. If I make a much larger change, let's just select the header here. Change that color. You can see that leaf has changed color as well. If I change any copy, maybe add an exclamation mark in here, you can now see that is also replicated on my design. So that skewing plugin is really useful to enable me to get to this sort of state, and using components to get there as well. The last one I'll show you before we jump into questions is this idea that I'm playing around with called Spec handoff. So again, I'll show you this before I show you how I built it. I'm going to play this prototype here. And you're probably going to get into a situation where you're building responsive designs as a designer. And in order for those to be successful, you need to hand your developers off documentation, guides, notes on how to build it. So you'll see at the bottom left, I've got this legend. There's padding, border radius, text, component, and colors. And then in the center, I've got this card. I built a menu inside the prototype to enable me to transition between the different sizes of that component and to show my development team what should happen at different sizes. Additionally, in here, I've added a toggle. Again, this is just a prototype. This is not necessarily native Figma functionality, where I can add or hide the specification. So I'm adding lines to all the elements on here to show my development team, this is the heading medium, this is a text regular, this is a spacer large. And as I go back down to small, that spacer large becomes spacer extra small. As I go to medium, it becomes space or small. So this can ultimately enable my development team to see basically inside of my head, to see what decisions I've made about the design using a prototype. So how have I built that? If I head over to the left-hand side here and hide my panels again, you'll see I have one big component called product card. And within here, I have two different states of the same one. So if I go further along, medium one and the large one. And then when I use them, let's just drag this out as an instance. You can see on the right-hand side, I've got size. I can toggle between them. And I've got these specs here. So I can turn those on and off. This is done on the canvas, not necessarily in the prototype, but it's how that's been built. What I then did was some funky things using prototyping, where you can see I've got another large component here, but this one actually has the menu built in to all of them and a different state of each different size. If I go to the prototype tab, you can see that all of these are then actually connected up together. So just like the drag example from before with the little Game Boy, each menu item links over to its respective size and state. And then I effectively just embed that on a separate screen. So something to think about. It's not necessarily what I would advise you to do for your developer handoff, but it's an interesting exploration into how you can use interactive prototyping and components to get there. I've been talking for a long time, and I'm sure there's lots of questions, so I'm happy to take them.
Yeah, so we've been getting lots of very positive feedback, which I think can be translated into the exploding head emoji.
I might just stop sharing my screen so I can jump back and see the chat, if that's all right.
Yes. So we've had some people, we've said, Krista said, what? I've always gone frame by frame. This is so much better. Yaz has said, this is amazing, going to be so much more efficient after this. People are generally quite thrilled. A big question that we've had come through is plugins, and which ones would be your favorite and which ones would you recommend for people who are kind of starting out with?
Yeah. So first one I'd recommend you install is the one called Contrast. And I'll just pull that up. Let's pull the link up. It's basically a great one for accessibility. So if you end up needing to test your designs to see whether the color contrast is efficient or effective, this one is what you'd want to be using. So I'm going to drop this in the chat and you can go and see that plugin. Another one that I'd recommend you check out is called Status Annotations. So I'll also drop this link in the chat as well. You just find it here. And this one allows you to add basically status labels to your designs. So when your developers are inspecting your file, they'd see, okay, this one's in progress, this one's ready, this one's not. So two to recommend there, but also the ones that I mentioned earlier. So Content Reel, I'll find this link as well and pop this in there. If you need to design with dummy content, that's going to be a really useful one to get you started. And then lastly, Unsplash. So that one is great for photography. So if you need to do some mock-ups or wireframes or something like that, use the Unsplash one and you can get going there.
Great. And we've a question here from Eva who asks, not having a preview of the fonts is a big flaw in Figma. Having found some plugins, are there any other solutions or is this the only way?
To let you inside some information, we have a working version of font preview internally. We're just running the testing on it. So it could be released pretty soon, but in the meantime, yes, you're going to have to use a plugin to do that. But yes, it's coming sooner rather than later. We have that working version.
And just as a reminder to everyone watching, if you have any questions, add them into the questions section so that we can try to get it in, because we have approximately 7 minutes left here in the webinar. We have a question here from Adrian who asks, as a junior, is it hard to become a design advocate at a company? And would you need prior UX design experience to excel in this position?
Yes and no. The short answer is, in order to give people advice on how to design, you must have had extensive experience on designing yourself. And that kind of just makes sense. However, if you have a deep passion for community and education at scale, we wouldn't say no. We just kind of need to be able, you need to be able to prove during that interview process that you have what it takes to educate people without necessarily having done it. And there's no reason to suggest that's not possible. It just might be a little harder than somebody who's also applying who does have that design experience. But fundamentally, if you have a passion for educating like this, basically, being involved in the community, and that's people like you, and also learning Figma intensively, then there's no reason why you shouldn't be applying.
Great. And we have a question here from Yaz, who wants to know about the best way to showcase a live high fidelity prototype on a website without using a GIF, because they feel that every time they use a GIF, the quality drops significantly.
I would use a Figma prototype and embed it on a website, if that's the question. If the question is about video, I'm not sure if it is. We are working on something.
This is great. This is the great big reveal.
Yeah.
I've got a question here for you in terms of your career, which might help some people kind of figure out what direction it is that they want to take. So you have had experience as a freelancer and also as an in-house designer. So for people who are trying to figure out their career structure, what were kind of your upsides and downsides of working kind of in each format?
Yeah, and the upsides are always releasing software or releasing websites or seeing what you've produced live. That's never going to get boring. That's never going to get dull. You'll always love it. The downside is it's probably not what you first designed. And my advice to every single designer getting started is please don't get attached emotionally to your work, because you're going to have to change it. And that's unfortunately the reality of life generally. But the reason you're probably going to have to change things is because of things like budget, timescales, engineering capabilities, or whether it's just feasible or not. So what I would always encourage people to do to reduce that potential headache or tearing your hair out is to sit as close as possible to your product managers, to your engineers, and to even the sales team, to be honest. The more people you get close to in a company, the better your designs are going to become and the better ideas you're going to generate. So don't get too precious about your designs, because to give you some insight into my design experience, I've always found it quite hard to build a portfolio because my initial design has not been what it has been when it gets released. And I need to now get comfortable with that to build a case study that is describing why that happened. If you can explain why you've done a design, why it was slightly different, what hurdles you had to jump over, and who you worked with, that's going to be so much better than just dumping a screenshot into your application. So that gets a little bit into sort of hiring, but hopefully that answers the question.
And we've had a few questions here about kind of handovers for developers. So James Ford has asked, is there any way of converting Figma into code so developers don't have to basically double job? But I might translate that into what can you do on your side of things to improve the developers' work when they're dealing with your designs?
Yeah, so I hope to break your heart, but there's never going to be a solution that is perfect for handing off to your developers the code, because as I mentioned at the start, every development team works differently. So for a tool to anticipate the way that you name your components, the way that you structure your architecture on a front-end perspective, whether you're using React, Angular, Vue, just plain HTML, CSS, PHP, whatever, no company is going to be able to keep up with all those technologies. So there needs to be something in the middle. And that is traditionally like a translation layer. And Figma's working really hard to get there, but we're not quite there yet. So if you do need to have something like a simple landing page, which you're exporting from Figma, there are plugins to do that, and I can send one in a second. If you do need to work closer with a React front-end team, given that you're working in such a high-end engineering environment, pull a developer into your design crit and say, hey, could we get you to build a custom plugin which translates Figma to your front end? And if you get the interest of your developer into your design process to investigate the Figma API, you'll be amazed at what you can actually achieve. And some of the more sophisticated design systems teams that I see do have custom tooling internally. So whether that's Uber, whether it's Netflix, or anyone else, they have a plugin that they have built themselves, which does things like pull in the Netflix thumbnails from their database, or pull in the Uber language and copywriting from their copywriting database. We don't see that in public because it's private, but that is a possibility which you can get to if you investigate things like the API.
And Maddie has a question here which kind of follows on from that, and I suppose it also reflects the type of hybrid kind of working kind of formats that we're all interacting with now. She asks, what do you recommend for building positive relationships with developers? Because the developer that Maddie works with is often unavailable to have proper conversations about the prototype. So how do you actually improve communications with someone who works in a different field and probably works in a different room to you?
Yeah, maybe a different Zoom room at this moment. Fundamentally, developers are humans, just like us, and they probably have different communication styles to you, which is probably the issue that you're facing right now. And I think actually trying to get onto each other's level is going to be the only way that you enjoy that job. And it needs to be from both sides. It's not going to be something that a designer can drive. However, you can do more things to make that relationship easier. I would always encourage every designer to get as close to a development team as possible. And to me, that means going to their sprint meetings, sprint planning, retrospectives, having a sit-in on the sessions where they're reviewing your designs, because that's where you start to build that relationship on both sides. If you can see that a developer is interested in your designs, the developer can see that you're interested in their code, you're going to meet in the middle to say, let's make the best solution for both ends of that spectrum, rather than it being design lives over here and engineering lives over here. Let's just throw those designs over the fence. That's never going to work. So it's about collaborating and often meeting in the middle. Invite your developers to your design crit. They might have better ideas than you. You don't know that yet. So getting into each other's spaces is going to be the best way to ensure a better collaboration going forward, but also showing interest. So contributing to their discussions, if you're using Slack or Teams or something, jumping into their channels and contributing to their ideas. I do that all the time at Figma, is getting involved and putting my face in as many places as possible to become trusted. The more trust you build, the easier that relationship's going to be.
Brilliant. Louis, we have come to the end of our webinar hour, and I'd like to say thank you so much for giving such great chats, some slight controversy and brilliant prototypes. For everybody who's tuned in, as soon as this session ends, playback will begin at the very start, but you'll also have access to a link so that you can watch it back and pause it if you wanted to kind of follow the prototypes that Louis had shown to us, and you can do it in your own time. And our next webinar will be happening on July 20th, and it'll be breaking into UX and UI games with Tandem from Wildlife Studios. So Louis, thank you so much. We hope that we can work with you again. And everybody who tuned in, thank you so much for participating and being so active and being so positive.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I apologize at how fast I was going. I bit off more than I could chew. If you have any questions further on, you know where to find me. I'm always available. So just drop me a direct message and I'll be more than happy to help.
Good evening. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers, everyone.